Welcome. My name is Karl Daglige. I am the curator working here at the Estonian Architecture Museum, and today I am going to introduce you to the exhibition Miracles in Concrete, structural engineer August Komendant. August Komendant was a structural engineer born in Estonia. During the Second World War, he, together with his family, escaped to Germany and later on to the United States of America, where he collaborated closely with Louis Kahn, Eero Saarinen, Moshe Safdie, and many other architects. But I'm also going to introduce you to the early career of Komendant. He worked for 10 years in Estonia, designed several interesting modernist structures, and I'm also going to introduce some less known projects, not only with what he worked on with Louis Kahn, but with other architects, among them Robert Geddes, Oscar Tenreiro, Henry Klumb, and many others. August Komendant was not just an ordinary engineer. He wasn't just a service provider, a technical service provider. He was among those engineers like Ove Arup or many others who were interested in the so-called larger picture. Society, built environment, not only the technical qualities, but also the aesthetic, the creative, the architectural side of built environment. Komendant was throughout his career interested and focused on reinforced concrete, structural material usually associated with the rise, possibly also the fall of modernism, new cities, new structures, new buildings, new architecture. Komendant from early on in his career was inspired and motivated to implement new theories of concrete. From 1930s, he implemented those new theories and new methodologies in Estonian architecture and later also in international architecture. So welcome and come join me to the exhibition hall. Komendant graduated from the Technical University of Dresden in Germany in 1934. As Hitler had come to power and said foreigners to better get lost from his country, Komendant decided to return to his native Estonia. He worked for 2 years at the Estonian Ministry of Roads as a young technician and an engineer, and designed several nationally important buildings. From 1936, he established his own design office and worked in Estonia, mainly on Estonian projects, until 1944, when he escaped from Estonia during the Second World War. Among his most important early projects is the Grandstand of the Kadriorg Stadium in Tallinn, Estonia, designed by architect Elmar Lohk, who was one of the best-known architects of the 1930s, the first wave of modernist architecture in Estonia. And Lohk invited Komendant to join his team and help figure out the innovative solution for the new reinforced concrete grandstand of the national track and field, but also soccer stadium. So what makes this grandstand special is, of course, its 50-meter wide and 12.8 meters cantilevered roof in the central part of the grandstand. This was innovative not only in Estonian context, but quite ambitious solution also in the European international context. Of course, Pierluigi Nervi, Eduardo Torroja, and others had been practicing and testing these kind of ideas in built form also earlier, but in Estonian context, a relatively small and relatively poor country at the time, it was a brave solution. This stadium's grandstand is among the most important modernist examples of architecture in the interwar Estonian architecture. After the Second World War, August Komendant, together with his family, lived in Germany. Komendant worked for the European command of the US Army there for about 5 years, mainly focusing on war damages of bridges, particularly reinforced concrete bridges. In 1950, the family got the permission to move on to the United States of America, and they used this possibility. In 1952, while Komendant was living in Manhattan, he published his book, Pre-Stressed Concrete Structures. This was a technical book, innovative in a sense that this was among the very first publications which introduced pre-stressed concrete in Northern American context. This was the book with which Komendant's name became better known among local architects and engineers. 4 years later, in 1956, they met for the first time with Louis Kahn for the competition of a monument in Chicago, the Enrico Fermi Memorial. This was never built, but this was their first collaboration and was the beginning of an 18-year-long collaboration and friendship with the Estonian engineer and an architect who was born in the Estonian territory, but had left with his family early on in his childhood. It was a coincidence that they were both from Estonia, but it kind of helped to establish their collaboration. They had a kind of similar background, at least partly. Kahn's and Komendant's first major collaboration was the Richards Medical Laboratory building, located in Philadelphia at the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. This was a special building not only in terms of Kahn's work, that it was among his first internationally appreciated projects, but it was also an indication of Kahn's interest in engineering and the technical side, and among his first projects where architectural, creative, artistic ideas were fruitfully, organically connected with the technical side. Both Kahn and Komendant believed that the building has to tell its story, how it stands up, how it has been built, how the materials are used. Nothing has to be hidden, everything has to be clear. So the Richards Laboratories completed in 1961, later edition in 1965. The Richards Laboratories became a landmark not only in Louis Kahn's and August Komendant's career, but also in the wider context of 20th century architectural history. At Richards, Kahn used his ideas of the served and servant spaces. This was clearly reflected also in the structural solution. There were no hanged ceilings, all the carrying elements were exposed. The technological equipment was seen from the researcher spaces. Nothing was hidden. There were no load-bearing walls in the researcher spaces, in the so-called studio towers. The windows had very thin light frame structure. In the 1950s, Dr. Jonas Salk decided to establish the Salk Laboratories of Biological Studies. He chose Louis Kahn as an architect, who asked again August Komendant to join his team and help consult the structural design part of the project. In front of me, you can see two sectional models of two different versions for the Salk Laboratories structural design. It was a special building, not only in Kahn's and Komendant's collaboration, but also in the wider context of technical buildings and research buildings in 20th century architecture. Salk wanted to have a building for top scientists in the wider global context. His ambition was to have existing and future Nobelists working out new solutions, and the architecture and the whole environment on the coast of the Pacific Ocean in La Jolla, California, had to support those goals. So initially, Kahn asked Komendant to design a folded plate structure, which was initially designed as a partly prefabricated structure, but the final solution with the Firendeel trusses was cast in situ, or a monolithic structure. It is an interesting building because the floors for the researchers, again, are free of load-bearing walls. There are no columns, free, flexible space to transform it according to research necessities. And the whole technical equipment is placed on separate floors created by the Firendeel trusses. So the technological equipment is placed in between the Firendeel trusses. As in most of Kahn's and Komendant's collaborations, again, the quality of reinforced concrete at Salk is exquisite. They worked hard on finding the exact mix and color for the concrete and the finishing which would satisfy both men, but also the client, Dr. Salk. In 1967, Montreal in Quebec, Canada, got the possibility to organize the World Exhibition Expo. Expo had a large building program, and young Israeli-born architect Moshe Safdie invited Komendant to join his team to help design a large urban ensemble. The initial plan was not realized, but only, let's say, about 1/5 of the program was realized. A large apartment building, which also became part of 20th century modernist architecture history. Habitat 67 essentially is a large stack of concrete boxes, which are tied together with post-tensioning cables. The boxes are load-bearing. There is no additional supportive structure. There are a lot of cantilevering spaces. It looks like a beehive or a kind of abstract Lego structure. Architect Safdie wanted to provide qualities of the space provided usually by individual residences. A lot of space, a lot of light, and privacy. But in an urban density, in an urban context. So his solution was to use modular elements and create one large ensemble of those boxes. Komendant helped to figure out not only the structural design, but also the building organization, the sequences of placing the boxes, and how would the structure be stable also during construction. So not only after the building is finished, but also during construction. Habitat 67 is an interesting case because this apartment building reflects the technological optimism of the 1960s, but it also tests the boundaries of modernist architecture and what modernist housing could be. Completed in 1972, the Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, must be among the most important art museums of the 20th century. It is also among the most interesting collaborative projects between Louis Kahn and August Komendant. It is an exquisite museum in terms of use of light, use of materials, how the structure is exposed, how the quality of reinforced concrete is part of the character of the building, how the landscape around the building is designed, and how the general environment in the exterior and also in the interior are combined. The very complex cylindrical shells, more particularly the cycloid shells, they are very difficult to handle mathematically. For that, Louis Kahn and his architects in the team needed a very able engineer. And August Komendant was inspired by the very ambitious idea and was able to figure out how those very thin cycloid shells can be cast and can be built. How the lighting system of the spaces for the galleries would work was the task of Louis Kahn and his team. They used particularly the reflectors to spread the light from the skylights, so it was reflected to the surfaces of the cycloid shells. The collection of the Kimbell Art Museum is very special, and therefore the need to have natural light, but so that it would not be directed directly to the artwork. As in many other cases, Komendant again suggested pre-stressed concrete. In this case, the shells were post-tensioned with high quality steel cables, and this is why they don't work as arches, but they rather work in a longitudinal section as shell structures. Among his closest collaborators among architects is also Oscar Tenreiro, a Venezuelan architect, a post-war modernist, quite well known in the Latin American context. Komendant and Tenreiro worked on 11 projects, of which only 1.5 were built. What was built was the first phase of Plaza Bicentenario in central Caracas. It is an extension of the Venezuelan presidential palace and the neighboring public square with underground parking, different gallery spaces, and also offices. Another building which began is the Teatro del Oeste, the dance theater, also in central Caracas. But what could be considered the most important collaboration between Tenreiro and Komendant is the National Gallery, also very close to the aforementioned buildings, unfortunately never realized. It was a very ambitious national art museum designed by Tenreiro in early 1980s, which was kind of inspired by Louis Kahn's Kimbell Art Museum, but took several steps further. It is a building which is adjusted to warm climate. It is also structurally very ambitious. Komendant suggested to use a folded plate structure, again saving the inner spaces from columns and a lot of load-bearing walls, so that the thin folded plate concrete parts would carry most of the building. Kahn, Galeria Arte Nacional, is Oscar Tenreiro's interpretation of several layers of architectural history, but also modernist architecture. It was supposed to be a monumental building with 4 inner courtyards and several galleries. Unfortunately, the project remained on paper, but is definitely among August Komendant's most important projects from his later career. In the early 1960s, August Komendant helped Robert Geddes and his colleagues from the office Geddes, Brecher, Qualls, and Cunningham to design the Philadelphia Police Administration, later known also as the Roundhouse. For the building, Komendant helped figure out the structural design in general, but also the details, for example, the system of the facade panels, the geometry of them, and those were precast, factory-made elements, which were load-bearing, consisted part of the technical equipment, and were later post-tensioned with, again, steel cables. Also part of the floor system, the floor slabs of floor panels were precast. So it was a combination of monolithic in situ concrete and factory-made precast concrete elements. The building still exists and is the most important collaboration between Robert or Bob Geddes' office and August Komendant. During the 1950s and early 1960s, Komendant did a lot of research on Firendeel trusses, the particular type of concrete structures usually implemented in bridge design. One of the projects which included Firendeel trusses in a complex combination was Komendant's sole collaboration with the Finnish-American architect Eero Saarinen. It was the project for the new colleges, the Ezra Stiles and Samuel Morse colleges at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. August Komendant was also a good friend with Henry Klumb, an architect born in Germany who worked for several years for Frank Lloyd Wright, but moved to Puerto Rico around 1940 and became the main modernist architect there. After the Second World War, Komendant worked with Klumb for several times. Possibly the most interesting project by them is the early design of the Del Carmen church, which was not realized. What was realized is a late project, a project from 1980s, the headquarters and research facilities for the Ciba-Geigy pharmaceutical company, which is located in Summit in New Jersey. August Komendant was a very charismatic person. He was firm in his positions, a person very difficult to argue with. It has been said that he didn't like to talk about things which he didn't know enough about. So he rather stayed quiet, relating to topics which he didn't know so much. But among his friends and colleagues, he was known as a charismatic person, enjoyed attention in a crowd, and was often focus of attention in parties. He has often been photographed with his pipe from 1940s. He always had his pipe. He was a heavy smoker, which was common at the time. So on my right hand, you can see his portraits from different periods of his life and some selected personal items, which we also decided to exhibit at the exhibition Miracles in Concrete. Those items, most of them have been donated by August Komendant's children, Merike Komendant Phillips and Jüri Komendant, who were born in Tallinn but fled the war with their parents in 1944. They have been very helpful to make this project happen, and we as a museum are very grateful to their contribution. August Komendant was a 20th century engineer. His career spanned more than 50 years, from early 1930s until late 1980s. He was an engineer who firmly believed that built environment should be designed in teamwork between different parties and with the aim of serving society. What was built was, in his opinion, supposed to be of as high quality as possible. Built environment needed the architect's creative touch, but it also, in his opinion, needed the technical knowledge and know-how, how to bring the architect's creativity to life, to make it happen in real space and make it available for the actual users. Komendant was interested in both theory and in practice. Throughout the decades, he taught students. Here we can see a photo with Louis Kahn in the center, August Komendant on the lower right-hand corner. This is a studio of the University of Pennsylvania architecture students. Here we can see August Komendant in the early phases of the construction of the Richards medical building in Philadelphia. So he was interested in research, but also the implementation of those new findings, new theories, new knowledge to be implemented in the actual work site, in the very structures designed by contemporary architects. August Komendant's relevance can be compared to other engineers of the 20th century, like Ove Arup, like Eduardo Torroja, or many others. They were the engineers who had a larger picture and understanding of how society and built environments are combined, how they influence each other. So in that sense, Komendant could also be considered as an engineer who truly served his time and society at large.